He died in command of a war he already knew he couldn't win. In May 1949, while Dutch forces still held the cities, the ports, every position that should have meant something, General Simon Spoor collapsed. Heart failure. 52 years old. The timing wasn't suspicious, it was exact. He had spent 4 years building a military reality the political world had already decided to ignore. They held the ground. They didn't hold the outcome. And Spoor, with the precision of a military mind, understood exactly what that meant, before almost anyone in The Hague was willing to say it aloud. He died knowing. The war kept going anyway. Spoor didn't die at the end of the Indonesian War. He died at the precise moment it stopped being a military question. He didn't outlive his usefulness. He died the same week it expired. By 1947, the Dutch had a choice: negotiate with a republic they didn't recognize, or move fast enough to make negotiation unnecessary. Spoor pushed for the second. The Indonesian Republic was fragile, newly formed, and outmatched. The first Politionele Actie launched in July 1947. Within weeks, Dutch forces controlled the major cities, the ports, the plantations. The Republic had existed for 2 years. It looked, briefly, like it might not reach 3. It looked like a solution. It was a provocation. The United Nations intervened immediately. A ceasefire, a committee. Pressure the Netherlands had neither the influence nor the allies to deflect. The United States made its position clear. A colonial war in Asia was not a cost Washington was prepared to absorb. Spoor understood this. He couldn't accept the conclusion. He pushed for a second offensive. December 1948. Operation Kraai. Dutch forces struck the Republican heartland, captured Yogyakarta, arrested Sukarno and Hatta, dismantled the Republic's military command within days. The most complete military success of the entire campaign. The United States threatened to cut Marshall Plan funding, not reduce it, cut it. The UN Security Council demanded full withdrawal. The pressure wasn't isolated, it was everywhere. The Dutch had captured the Republican leadership and handed the world a reason that needed no translation. Spoor had won the operation. He had ended the war. The Dutch didn't lose the Indonesian Revolution because they were outfought. They lost it because every time they won on the ground, they lost in the room where the actual decisions were made. They captured the capital. They didn't capture the decision. Spoor was the finest instrument of a strategy that its own architects were no longer willing to defend. By early 1949, negotiations were no longer a question of whether, only how fast. Spoor saw it, all of it. This is the part the campaign reports don't capture. In May 1949, he flew to the front lines one final time. He inspected positions The Hague had already agreed to abandon. He reviewed troops who didn't yet know they'd already lost. Not broken, compressed. Then he returned, and he died. The war ended 6 months later. What the Dutch conceded in December 1949 wasn't just sovereignty. It was the acknowledgement that 4 years of military logic had been applied to a problem that was never military in nature. Spoor had been asked to solve with force what could only be resolved through recognition. He delivered exactly what was asked. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. He was defeated not by the Indonesian army, though the guerrillas bled his forces thin, but by the gap between what a military can control and what a political situation will accept. The Dutch held the territory. They did not hold its meaning. You can occupy a city. You cannot occupy the decision made in Washington that the price is too high. The commanders who survived their wars write the postmortems. Spoor didn't survive. What he left behind was a military that had done everything asked of it, and a war that ended anyway. Not because the Dutch couldn't hold their positions, because the positions no longer held any value. The offensives, the captured cities, the arrested president, the 4 years, the illusion of control. The Dutch held the map. Indonesia held what the map was for. This is how wars like this end. Not when the fighting stops. When control stops meaning anything. That transfer, the formal handover of sovereignty in December 1949, didn't happen because the Dutch ran out of soldiers. It happened because the United States applied a pressure the Netherlands had no mechanism to resist. What Washington actually threatened, in and why the Netherlands had no choice but to accept it. That is a different kind of weapon entirely. That's the next video.